Friendships really are life, and if you don't have friendships, you're going to miss out a lot, and you're going to miss out on a lot of really tangible opportunities. I was born in 1927 in New York City. I went to Princeton when I was 16. I was young. I got down halfway through my sophomore year before I went into the Navy. They had an officer training program going at the time, but by the time I went to Princeton, the war in Europe was winding down, and by the time I became 18, which is the draft age, we had beaten Germany. So I went to quartermaster school, Navy school, and did very well, and they asked me to stay as an instructor. And I said no, I wanted to go to the fleet, so I went out to California, and they put me on 2 submarine chasers, and we used to go out and run around in the Pacific. After a while, one of the submarines we were working with, tied up at the same dock, the war was over, and they had a lot of quartermaster signalmen who were like me, college boys, who were not going to be Navy guys at all. So they all left. You had a system in World War II that the longer you served, the more dangerous service, you gained points. And then when they discharged high points down. So a lot of these guys on the submarine had a lot of high points. So suddenly this submarine, among others, didn't have enough quartermaster signalmen. So they asked me if I would like to be a temporary duty quartermaster signalman. I said sure, it'd be quite an experience. So I served on the Redfish for a little while, never in danger. The submarine I served on had had a very, very terrifying experience. They'd sunk a big Japanese carrier, and they'd been depth charged for 6.5 hours sitting on the bottom in 280 feet off Japan. That was an experience. Then I came out and I went back, finished up at Princeton. I got into finance, and then finance led to the oil business, and here I am. Value can be a very expensive gemstone, or it can be freedom. And people value things, they should value things they don't, such as freedom, such as meals, such as a place to sleep. A value is very much a subjective term, which is colored by the frame of reference, the inner outlook of the person using it. Friendships to me then were a matter of a little coterie, a little club, a little team. And as life went on, they represented all the dimensions of life that I necessarily then had not been through myself. And when I would meet somebody from just simply another country, there was a whole nother window to that country before which I'd only thought of it as a postage stamp because I collected stamps. I mean, friendships brought so much. They were sometimes difficult to develop. They were sometimes painful. But friendships per se were absolutely imperative to me. I mean, and then in a larger sense, if you don't have friendships, you aren't able to enjoy the world, live in the world, and be responsible for the world, because other people are the same as you are. So I think friendships are critical, and I don't mean just being friends to everybody. I mean friendships that are truly friendships, and not just friendships because it's a high mucky-muck of somebody that's your friend to so-and-so. I was a very good friend of George Bush. The fact that he became President of the United States, I was of course pleased about, but I knew him as we were all growing up, and he was a good friend, a wonderful guy. And we had common interests in the early days baseball. So friendships is critical, I think, and I feel very sorry for people who just have never taken the trouble, and it is an effort often, to develop friendships. Going to boot camp with a boot camp company being 100, half it from New York City. I was then living in the Upper East Side, fancy part of New York City, And my boot company was 50% from New York, which included the Bronx, Brooklyn, Jackson Heights, Lower East Side, everything. Nobody else from the so-called Silk Stocking District. And there was 50 from New York City, including 3 blacks, interestingly enough, and we were known as an Eleanor Roosevelt company, because Eleanor Roosevelt had been pushing for years to get the blacks integrated into the military. And so we were one of the trial boot companies that had 5, I guess, blacks from Harlem. And the other half were from the hills of West Virginia, many of whom had never seen a toothbrush. They were real backwoodsmen. And so you can imagine when they put us all together, there were lots of tensions. And the best thing you do when you go in the military is keep your head down, which I was smart enough to do. But we had lots of frictions. And in the course of the basic, one of the reasons they shave your hair and beat you up and scream and yell at you and make you feel terrible, just nothing. One is to get everybody down to the same level so they can train you to be a team. And 2 is so that you can pick up a friend. Things are so bad that you look around for friends, and you'll pick friends from your group who are having just as bad a time as you are. We just called them buddies. They were people that suddenly you seem to get along with, and so you've got to stick this out together. Gee, we got to stick this out together. So that was a learning experience in itself. And my best 2 friends in boot camp, one came from Brooklyn, not a wealthy kid at all. The other came from one of the creeks and hollers of West Virginia. He came from a little town with the great name of Frozen, West Virginia. And we were very close all through boot camp. We went to different parts of the Navy. We kept in touch 5-10 years later and then lost touch. But that was a very important lesson of getting along with people. And again, I've always been a booster of, for many reasons, of high school kids spending 2 years in the military. And it's so good for them at that period in life. If they're very poor and having tough life all the way through, gives them a chance to see another life, meet some people who've had a better life, see what the real horizon is. If they're entitled, they think they know everything and have everything, and even if they don't think that way, the fact is that they are entitled. That they wake up and they go down and they have a hot meal, and mommy says, okay, and dad says, get ready for school, and then the weekends they're all friendly. You know, a lot of people in this world don't live that way. They have a struggle all the time. And so this teaches you humility. It teaches you survivability to some degree. And when you get through 2 years, you've probably done some travel you never would have before, and you begin to feel good about yourself. And that's at a time in your life when you're most plastic, when you're changing. Your person is no longer a school kid, but you're getting into being a young adult. Growing up with technology, you don't know how to talk to people, how to look them in the eye. You don't know how to read body language. You don't know what they're thinking. And in terms of the self, you spend so much time doing this and not enough time looking around. I mean, you look at nature, look at around. Not to make too much of a thing of it, but Reading offers so much to so many people. I mean, look at the trail system. I'm a trustee of the Reading Land Trust, and we fight this battle all the time, getting people outside. And, you know, like Putnam Park, there's a marvelous resource. There's a great museum. Interpretive guides are there all summer on the weekends to tell you about what went on here in Reading. And people just kind of they don't look to see and try to educate themselves about other things. When I grew up, and not just in my family, but many families, no matter what walk of life they came from, came together one time during the day, usually at dinner. They sat down and they talked about things. What'd you do? What'd you do? It was a way that every family pretty much worked, and they did it night after night after night after night, and that was a way of bringing the culture from the adults into their children. And they didn't just hammer them, they didn't just tell them to read about it. They certainly in those days, even the radio, and certainly not television, see these flashes of dramatic culture. It all came as a natural thing, the good, the bad, the difficult, the unfortunate. It all just came as things that had happened to the family, and Mom and Dad said, well, you shouldn't worry, excuse me, you shouldn't worry about this. Think about this and think about this. They were your teachers. The electronic stuff was invaded to where those family gatherings and understandings and learning, subtle but important learning, is no longer taking place. I hate to sound like an old grouch, but I think I am in this, and I think the electronic age, though wonderful though it is in so many ways, has shortchanged youth a great deal in the way that they seek friendships, the way they can read people, the way they can also, incidentally, in a negative sense, if somebody is harassing you or bullying you or dissing you, you can see it right away and you don't take it so personally. I mean, you can see that this is a jerk. And it becomes pretty evident if you're used to dealing with people and reading them and seeing them, and have some people who aren't jerks, who are your friends. And that reading people and seeing people and being aware of what's around you, not to mention the nature of everything, I think the time that normally that would sort of seep into you, with its disappointments to be sure, and pains and suffering, is all denied because of the time that's spent in the word instant gratification. I guess it's descriptive, it's overused, but that's what it is. I mean, you can't get into Google and say, how do I handle the fact that so-and-so is nasty to me? You may go to your mother, you used to do it, or your dad, and your mother would say, well, just avoid him, and your dad would say, pop him in the nose. But, you know, you can't do that. But you can't get any of that stuff out of here. And I think there's always been bullying, there's always been dissing, there's always been trying to gain a little stature by pushing somebody else down. It's the way the animal world works. But to understand what's going on when you get dissed and you feel terrible, to understand what it's all about, makes it much less harsh. And again, people have to understand that you don't have to be perfect all the time. You have to be better.